Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome to another episode of Sree's daily global COVID-19 show. My name is Sree Sreenivasan, and today is episode 233 in 233 days, and we have a very important topic with 5 days to the election, Gen Z and first-time voters. We have 3 guests with us, Marie Mendy, Julio Taku, and Treasure Brooks. Marie is a student at Cornell. She's a recipient of the Gucci Changemaker Scholarship and founder of at Blueprint Archives on Instagram. Julio Taku, don't call him Julio, is a student at Stony Brook University, culture editor of the Stony Brook Press, and host of Across the Mic with Julio Taku. And we're also joined by Treasure Brooks, a student at Harvard, an activist and cultural critic, and host of The Meteor Explains on IGTV. This is part of our Stony Brook journalism episodes. We have my students at the Stony Brook School of Journalism producing several episodes as part of their Digital Innovations in Journalism course. And tonight's episode is produced by Gabriella Santana, Kiara Arias, and Tania Taheri. You will meet Tania and Gabby in just a minute, and then you will meet our other guests as well. Hi, everybody. I'm Sree. I'm the Marshall Loeb Visiting Professor of Digital Innovation at Stony Brook School of Journalism. Thank you all for being here. Please tag and share with your friends right now. I'm also the co-founder of Digimentors, a social, digital, and virtual events consulting company. We work on virtual events. We've had events of 50 people and events of 100,000 people. We bet your event is somewhere in between. If you haven't seen the show before, we are on every night, including election night, so be sure to join us for that. We've had more than 419 guests in 71 cities in 20 countries, including the chief scientist of the World Health Organization. Our archives are on youtube.com/SreenEt, and we're in partnership with Scroll Global and Scroll.in. We're so grateful to our producers, Rose Horowitz at Rose Horowitz 31 and Vandana Menon, Vandana_Menon. We're live right now on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, and on LinkedIn. Please hit share and make sure your friends and family around the world can join us. Is there a more important topic than what's happening with this voting and what's happening with first-time voters? By the way, I want to give a big shout out and thank you to our 2 producers, Rose and Vandana, as well as our other colleague, Neil Parekh, for last night on my 50th birthday. They took over the show and surprised me with an incredible episode with so many friends and family members around the world watching, participating, sending in videos. It was an amazing evening. Despite the pandemic, despite shutdown, I felt very connected and very grateful. So if you're ready now to talk about the elections, we're going to be bringing on in a minute Marie Mendy, Julio Taku, and Treasure Brooks. But before that, let's please say hello to Tania Taheri and Gabriella Santana, who are my students at Stony Brook School of Journalism. Hi, folks.
Hi, how are you?
Thank you so much for arranging this for us. Tell us how you decided on this topic. Tania, you first.
We picked this topic because we thought it was very relevant and timely as the presidential election quickly approaches, and as many young voters are dominating the polls and casting their votes early.
Great. And how about you, Gabby?
Yeah, very similarly. This seems like just an incredibly timely, relevant sort of topic, especially considering the fact that Gen Z is doing very well in terms of like polling numbers. And I read a statistic about how we're already, in terms of early voting, not specifically Gen Z, but overall in early voting, we're doing much better than the previous 2016 presidential election. And I just thought it'd be really interesting to like delve into an entire new set of like voters that are, able to do so this year.
Excellent. And we're going to meet our guests in just a minute. I will say that what would be really interesting is to hear from folks who are voting for the first time this election cycle, because they were too young to vote in 2016. In my own home, I have 2 17-year-olds who turned 17, so not old enough yet to vote in this cycle, but they're doing the best they can. And my daughter is involved with an organization called Coalition Z that works with Gen Z, but she and her twin brother, of course, are too young to vote in this particular election. So let's put the card back on and let's welcome Marie, Treasure, and Julio. A reminder, Marie is a student at Cornell, Julio is a student at Stony Brook, and Treasure is a student at Harvard. And all three of them are involved in various ways with voting and elections and just paying attention to what is happening all around us. And so we're very grateful to them for spending part of their Thursday night with us. Hello, folks.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening. I'm going to ask each of you a simple question. Where are you? How are you? And how's your family doing through the pandemic? And then I'll hand you over to my two students. Julio, let's start with you.
I am currently in Huntington Station, Long Island. That's in New York. I am doing personally pretty well. I'm in good spirits. I'm healthy, and so is my family. It's the least I can ask for.
Yeah, that's very important. And God bless and good luck. Let's go to Treasure.
I am currently in New York City. I'm doing well, and as is my family. Thank you for asking.
All right. And let's go to Marie.
I'm in Ithaca, New York for school, but as for my mental, I'm doing as best as I can with school and like the COVID situation. But my family's doing well, so thank you for asking as well.
Excellent. I'm now going to hand this over to my students, Gabby and Tania. Over to you, folks.
To start, I would like to thank you all for being here. I would like to start with, have you voted before? If so, what election was it, and what was that experience like? Julio, let's start with you, please.
I personally, the last election I voted in, it was a local one, and I cast my ballots with my parents. It was the first time we voted as citizens, which felt incredible. My parents they were recently naturalized when we voted in the local elections, and it was very satisfying. It was like a way of affirming us being here about 10 years now. So that was my voter experience.
That is amazing. Thank you for sharing your positive experience with us. Marie, can we please go to you?
Sorry. I've never voted before. This will be my first election voting. But yeah, my parents are like avid and religious voters. They're immigrants themselves as well. So I think they've kind of like instilled that kind of fervor within me. So.
That is great. I'm excited for you to vote this upcoming election. Treasure, maybe go to you, please.
Yes, so this will be the first time I'm voting in a presidential election, but similar to what others have said, I voted on a local level in Vermont my sophomore year of college.
So I feel like so far there's, a different like range and like who's voted, who hasn't, and stuff. So I'm curious to know like what stigmas do you guys believe exist when it comes to like Generation Z when it comes to voting? Because I've like heard, some of the backlash or like some of the like negative connotations associated when it comes to Gen Z and like different like aspects of like the political conversation. But I'm curious, what stigmas do you guys personally think exist? Marie, you can start first if you would like.
Yeah, so like obviously the stigma that we don't care or like we're not invested politically in what happens in this country is a huge one that I think pervades all age ranges in terms of how they view Gen Z voting, and they just think that we're like uneducated and just like overall disinterested in everything that don't concern ourselves, and I think that's wholly ignorant and just like completely false. I think with those misconceptions, it's a lot of disillusionment within our generation with just seeing how the political landscape has evolved to where it is today. And I think a lot of us are just simply disillusioned, but I think a lot of us don't use that disillusionment to shun a political process. I think a lot of us are invested, but are invested in different ways than previous generations have seen.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like even in respect to social media being like such a profound thing, it's definitely played a role in like how we are able to get involved in terms of our political activism. And I feel like it really has just redefined the word in itself because, we have different access to different forms of like getting involved. So Treasure, if you, do you need me to ask the question again? I don't know if like I got lost.
Yeah, I think I remember. What are the stigmas surrounding Generation Z as voters? Similar to Marie, I think that there is definitely a camp of people that believe that Gen Z is apathetic or that we are disinterested in electoralism and electoral politics. And then I think there's another camp that actually understand we're incredibly politically engaged to the point of almost being maybe hypersensitive to politics. And that's where we see the sort of stereotype of being the snowflake or being irrational when it comes to politics. They're very, very rooted in emotion, I think, for our generation, which I don't necessarily think is a negative thing, but it's definitely a stigma that's recurring and that we're going to see how it really manifests this election season. Because I think that in the conversations I've had, the intergenerational conversations I've had, a lot of older people don't believe that the sort of zeal we feel in terms of our ethical codes will transfer over to the numbers. And I think already with early voting, we're seeing that that's not true. And given that Gen Z is now of voting age and 24 million of us, I believe, are registered to vote, we're going to see more alignment in sort of the fervor of our politics and how we vocalize them and then how we show up in the voting booths.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. Julio?
I firmly agree with both Treasure and Marie. Our generation is one that has witnessed the political polar opposites, if you will, and have witnessed a lot of things, whether it is socially, culturally, economically. We have been through 2 terms of Obama and 1 of Trump. So to say that our politics is either uninformed or we're disinterested is to discredit us on a very dangerous level, because as before mentioned, 24 million of us are registered to vote. We are very much adults and we are asserting ourselves in that space, whether or not older generations want us to. Our hypersensitivity is actually it's attributed to our capacity to empathize with people, and that's not a bad thing. And it carries over into our politics and how we feel it is our responsibility to exercise our civic duty at the polls, and to be able to vote and to do so in droves. Social media is one thing we've definitely leveraged, and I pay some of that credit to Obama's presidency and how they took advantage of the fact that we were so involved on social media already. He met us in the middle, and Trump has done that in another form, but we see these politicians in broad daylight. So we're able to, I believe, be more informed than prior generations. We've seen where there were missteps on their behalf and we have suffered the consequences. So we're building a future for ourselves and posterity that we want and we feel we deserve and the rest of the world deserves. So we're much more politically active than whatever the stigmas say.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you for acknowledging the stereotypes surrounding Gen Z. That brings me to my next question. I would like to know, what are the priorities of younger voters and what exactly do they care about this upcoming election? Julio, can we begin with you, please? Again.
No problem. I think one of the very, very large topics our generation is concerned with is overall justice and police brutality. In the wake of the current social/racial uprising and awakening, we are really, really holding these institutions and systems accountable for how they have underserved people, whether they be whether they're minorities or have just been disenfranchised overall in the political field. We are putting a magnifying glass on these systems and asking them to see us and acknowledge us and give us full agency of our being. So I truly believe that that's something that's very important to us, as well as what the political landscape looks like in terms of whether it is a Democratic majority or Republican majority, that is going to shape a lot of what our lives will play out for that, especially in terms of the Supreme Court justice appointments. Those are lifelong positions, and most of the people that are on there now are of a generation bygone, far behind, and nowhere near in the same alignment with us politically or what we see socially and we think we need. So we're looking for big changes. And another thing I believe we want is a younger political field, one that reflects us, or is at least in terms of time closely related to us. Somebody who is in their 60s or 70s might not serve us as well as somebody who's in their mid to late 40s or 50s. So I think that's another thing we're looking to change up as we make our voices heard politically.
I definitely agree. Very well said. I believe the goal here is to advocate for vulnerable members of society. Marie, can we go with you, please, for your thoughts?
Yeah, just similarly, justice, the state of policing in this country, racism in America, all things that have to do with like inequality, income inequality, and like the ways those issues have been exacerbated over the years are issues that I think are pertinent to young voters, especially as we are supposed to enter the workforce. And so things like that, and just issues that affect Americans as a whole, with like abortion, student loans, climate change. I think a lot of the times young voter issues are dubbed as young voter issues instead of just like political issues as a whole. And I think that that's a part of the reason that we are stigmatized stigmatized so negatively, just because our issues are not seen as issues viable on like a public forum, viable on the public stage. And I think that our issues are just as important and are similar to the issues that political leaders often call on when they do debate, when they do speak to their platforms. But yeah, more specifically, a lot of issues surrounding the justice system, the abolishment or police reform, however you want to look at that. So yeah.
Great, thank you. Treasure, your thoughts, please?
So to echo what Marie said when she first spoke, I think that, yes, our generation is incredibly disillusioned and disenchanted with the supposed democracy that has always been a representative republic, never a democracy, but we're also seeing it's just incredibly corrupt. And so I don't think that young voters are seeking to eradicate any of the pre-existing issues of our society, but really seeking to prevent the current inequities from metastasizing to the extent that they could. And I think, as Marie said, these issues of policing in our communities and a reinvestment in local politics has allowed for us to get back into the minutia of really what elections have always been about. And even though the American education system doesn't provide a real robust civics education program, we have young people that are becoming informed, and they're autodidactic. They're teaching themselves how our government works. And so now I'm seeing so much information circulate around different propositions and what to vote on them. And we're seeing down ballots and people explaining all of the different elections that are currently taking place other than just the presidential one. And so I think that generally our interests lie with the working class. I think we're able to understand how class stratification in this country is just as insidious an issue as racism and homophobia and all of the other social ills that are, I guess, more recognizable. But with this vested interest in working in the working class and in labor justice, we're going to see a shift in how people vote, the way that corporations are handled. We're going to see a difference in how people vote on the budgets, the local budgets going into schools. And then, as I said before, just I think a broader understanding of what offices are actually up for office, from sheriff to public advocate to state legislators, assembly members. And I think that in that sense, regardless what happens on a presidential scale, I think that we're going to see a huge shift in local politics, because different elected officials that have been staying in their seats, that have been holding different positions for decades, sometimes without actually doing anything to serve their communities, they now have a spotlight being shown on them again. And as Julio said, that is a form of holding them accountable. So I do think there's this reinvigoration of accountability, of civic education, and just generally anything, any autonomy that we can find in this otherwise what I find to be an incredibly obsolete system. We're going to use it. And so those nooks and crannies that get into the way that class inequity manifests itself and how it functions through budgets, through different smaller offices that people aren't aware of, I think those are where Gen Z is focusing.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I feel like in the theme of like, that's exactly what Gen Z is attempting to accomplish. It brings me to my next question, which has to deal with like, so far, turnout amongst college voters has doubled from 19% in 2014 to 40% in 2018, like within the 2018 midterm elections. And this is a pretty interesting number, considering that young people are like technically considered to maybe like vote in lower numbers. But I'm curious, like, what you guys think. Like, why do you think, what do you think caused this drastic increase? Anybody can start.
I don't mind starting. Something that I've been considering a lot is, where do these numbers really come from, and what's happening? I mean, we always see these numbers saying that young people don't vote, but when we think about the intricacies of voting for everyone, voter suppression on just a mass scale, but then when we really zoom in and magnify young people, we're thinking about, where are we located? I think that this election with mail-in ballots, we understand how difficult it is if you're not in the state that you're registered to vote, ensuring that your vote is counted. And young people face that every single election because most of us are college students, right? And so when you think about the various hurdles that inhibit us from voting and the ways that those become even more real for young people, having different forms of valid ID. Some of us, because we're in an incredibly economically turbulent moment, a lot of us don't have permanent residencies. That was my truth for a long time. And so I think that it's one that now we're home. COVID has allowed for us to be home and stand in line and ensure that we get our ballots and that they're casted and counted. And I also think that there's this differentiation that no one is really making between Generation Z and millennials. And technically, Generation Z only goes up to 24-year-olds, which means that in the last presidential election, they would have been 20. And that's such a small portion of our generation that was actually eligible to vote in the last presidential election. And that's no longer the case. So I think there are so many different factors we need to consider about how accessible it is for young people to vote, given that we typically are, completely displaced from our home communities. And then also things like I mentioned before about the enthusiasm around voting, the civic education that I think Generation Z definitely has because of the internet that millennials maybe weren't as familiarized with, and their politics can in some ways align more so with boomers or with, older generations.
Yeah, most definitely. Those are important just distinctions to know. And I feel like they apply greatly to just regards to who's voting, who's not, and what's it called, inhibit certain people than others, stuff like that. Julio, if you could go next, please.
I think Treasure pretty thoroughly covered a lot of the things that are motivating us to vote, some of the things that are limiting us from voting. One I hadn't even considered until just now how great of a degree it is true that we are very displaced as a population, because a lot of us are either on campus or at home. And if we're on campus but we want to vote locally, we need to make sure we get in contact with our parents and get the absentee ballots. Or if we're on campus, we need to be up to date on what the campus is doing. Some campuses are providing buses, like Stony Brook is, to allow students the ability to vote without having to find or procure transportation for themselves. And that alone disenfranchises a large population of us, because if you're going to now speak to the population of students that are at home, or the population of people, let me not just say students, because there are bigger constituents and members of our group that aren't students as well. Not everybody's a student. The ones that are at home with one polling place that is across town, and they live in an area where the bus passes by every 2 or 3 hours, or their parents work and they're not able to leave because they have to babysit. And there are just so many limiting factors and hurdles, as she said, that prevent us from participating on a civic level. But on the same token, we are more motivated, I think, than ever before, due to the fact we have seen some god-awful grievances against not only our generation on a rhetorical level, with people just talking down at us, underestimating us, but also we have seen the evils of what the current political system can do, what it has done against some members of our community, whether you're marginalized, you're part of the LGBTQ community, you're part of the Dreamers community, you're Latinx, you're Hispanic, you're Black, and you're worried about whether you'll be able to get home safe, and just a lot of things that have to do with our very personal identities and realities as people are on the line right now. So us participating, I think a lot of us feel it is mandatory in a way. We can't afford to drop the ball, because we've seen the ball dropped by our older siblings, our uncles, our aunts, our mothers, our fathers. There have been generations who didn't participate for a bevy of reasons, mind you. Not all of it was by choice, but we've seen what happens when inaction is the decision chosen over action and people don't participate. So on that, we are participating on a hyper level, I believe, because these numbers don't just jump by accident. There's definitely a clear correlation between the pandemic now forcing us to be at home, and we're now on our phones, we're engaging with each other on forums, Instagram lives, through tweets, and all these different things. So we're having these conversations, whether they be colloquial or political, and we're really starting to question, is this system working the way it says it should? Like, for example, the Electoral College, that was created in the 1800s. We're in 2020. I think our generation are really starting to question some of these age-old so-called traditional practices for the sake of just moving forward and creating a future we see as more suitable for everybody.
Yeah, I think they pretty much covered it. What I just want to add is like the idea of investing in local politics, because the numbers that you guys pointed out were for the midterm elections, and midterm elections are national, are more local. And I think that because of like the 2016 election and like the political shock that sent to us specifically, in terms of encroachments on our identity, encroachments on a lot of people's right to live, and just basic rights, I think that invigorated a lot of us to take the wheel into our hands, because we were at the brunt of these decisions when we didn't have a chance to decide anything. And so I think the political campaign that like ensued in for the 2018 midterm elections really reflected our as a generation, the need to invest in our local politics, and the need to invest into who's our local representatives, who's our local judges, and like those decisions affect us almost more than national elections, because those are the things that affect our daily lives. And so just seeing how that progresses, the progression from local politics to national politics, are really connected and interlinked, is probably part of the reason why we've seen that big jump.
Thank you. Julio, you mentioned the Electoral College. That actually brings me to my next question. I'd like to address misinformation in the age of voting, especially surrounding the Electoral College. How knowledgeable do you think you and your peers are about the Electoral College and the popular vote? And why do you think so many individuals are misinformed about this?
I think personally, we aren't as informed as we should be. I had to brush up as soon as the 2016 elections were concluded on what the Electoral College actually decides. And even before this, I had to brush up again on what exactly it decides, because I think we should go with the popular vote. It makes sense. Our whole lives as kids, even when we're in class and the teacher's like, oh, who would like us to go over the homework today? Raise your hand. We use democracy there. We're taught what democracy actually looks like our entire childhood. And then we get to a stage where one of the parties is allegedly democratic. We allegedly live in under a democratic government. And the Electoral College kind of pokes a hole in that, because that doesn't seem to be in line with what democracy should look like. If the people speak and say they want a certain candidate, but the Electoral College decides otherwise, why is it still being enforced? Why is this 300, 400-year-old practice still continuing till this day? There were amendments made to the Constitution, but we can't amend or modify the Electoral College. I think not all of us are as educated as we should be, and we really should brush up on it, because there are certain states where it's winner takes all, and there are certain states where it comes down to even within certain counties and lower than a congressional level. If there's one vote, it has to go towards them, even though the popular vote has decided otherwise. And it's just these little minutia that most people aren't aware of that we need to really educate ourselves on. So our generation, as much as we're going to show up to the polls, and we are showing up to the polls, we need to also be informed about those little things that may, quote unquote, make or break the election for us.
Definitely. Marie, your thoughts, please?
Yeah, similarly, I think a lot of us are misinformed, but I think back to the 2016 election, we've been jolted to kind of invest further and further investigate into what the Electoral College is. I think I remember a lot of us, like when I was in high school, we were like, oh, like, what is this? Like, obviously the popular vote said Hillary was meant to win. And so like that further disillusionment caused some of us to kind of investigate that further. And I do think, like Julio said, like we do have more to brush up on. There's so many back ends and like political nooks and crannies that we don't really know about as a people. And I wouldn't just say this is for Generation Z. I think a lot of people are ill-informed about the Electoral College, but a lot of people also have been forced to kind of investigate this system and obviously dub it as something that needs to be eradicated.
Yeah, I feel like that definitely has a lot. The idea of the Electoral College, I feel like similar to what you guys mentioned in regards to the 2016 presidential election, just seeing how like Hillary had won the popular vote and then Trump had won like amongst the Electoral College, that was very like, it just threw me, because I just feel like we weren't necessarily informed on like what necessarily went into the politics that were kind of dictating like our well-being. And I feel like that's a similar situation amongst other young voters, or just like other young people, just like amongst Gen Z, where we aren't as informed as we should be. And I think we need to just, continuously try to understand like what's going on among the country around us as much as possible. And that kind of brings me to my next question that has to do with, what would you say to someone who believes their vote, quote unquote, doesn't matter? Treasure, you could start, please.
Ooh, I love this question. I'm going to say something really unpopular. Sometimes it doesn't. sometimes your vote doesn't count. And that's a conversation we need to start having. The Electoral College is an incredibly flawed system. And there's conversations right now about what it looks like. I mean, all of these systems. I mean, the extension of the Supreme Court.
I think Treasure's having some Wi-Fi issues. Julio, please, can we go to you?
Yes, just restate the question quickly, please.
Yeah, so what would you say to someone who believes their vote, quote unquote, doesn't matter?
Oh, in that case, I would have to agree with what Treasure began saying. In some cases, your vote doesn't matter as much as you would like it to, because the Electoral College is indeed a flawed system. But in the spirit of what we need to happen, you have to show up. I would prefer you show up. Let me not say you have to. I don't want to dictate what people do with their free time and how they exercise their agency in the political process. But you need to think outside of yourself and consider those who your vote will change a lot for. If you are a cis hetero man of any background, of any ethnic background, you have the patriarchy on your side. You will likely be okay regardless of who is in office. But if you are a transgender man or woman, the election might decide your personal security, your bodily security, whether you'd be able to marry who you want, whether you're able to get proper health care, whether you're able to be safe in the streets, because we are creating and support the electoral candidate or the decided president creates a culture in which your identity is one that is not just tolerated, but celebrated or supported enough for people to not be comfortable, or at least feel they can inflict harm on you, whether it's verbal or physical. Whether if you're a cancer patient and you have pre-existing conditions, is my healthcare going to be together? Am I going to be able to see the same doctor? If you're undocumented, am I going to be able to continue to live comfortably? Is there a fine path for me to become a citizen? There's so many different things that people have to contend with outside of ourselves that we don't consider when we selfishly say, my vote doesn't count, and we decide not to do anything. Sure, your individual vote might not count, but your participation in the collective system definitely has the power to change things on a massive scale. So we need to think a lot more holistically and on a macro level when we make such statements, and when we try to get others to align with the belief that our votes don't count. And also, I believe it dishonors the people who have literally died in order to get us the ability to vote. So to say your vote doesn't count or it doesn't matter is disrespectful first and foremost to those who came before us.
Yeah, definitely. Marie, your thoughts?
Yeah, my views more align with, like, I feel you to a certain extent. As Trezor was saying, I think a lot of the times when we push people to refute your vote doesn't matter, it kind of becomes this like, oh, you have to vote. But like, there's a lot more that goes into voting for a lot of people than just voting. It means taking off from work. It means a lot more things for people than just putting in your ballot. But I do want to say that I think voting in your local elections matter a lot, because those are the things that affect your daily life a lot more than having a national election and voting in a president who honestly doesn't have that much effect on your life unless a state official enacts those federal policies. So I will say, like, on the note of like the Electoral College and the corruption that is, yeah, sometimes your vote doesn't count. But I do think if you invest into your local politics, you will see changes. And just like going to like city council hearings, and just like making your presence known in places that you can matters, because even if they don't change anything, just your simple presence will, like your presence being there when it usually isn't, might force elected officials to maneuver a different way and speak differently, and have to be accountable to you and your presence and your identity, versus you not being there, you basically being non-existent in their political eyes. So I don't want to shun people for not voting, because there's a lot of truth in that. There's a lot of voter suppression. There's a lot of corruption in our political system. So I won't shun people who say their vote doesn't matter, because a lot of the times it's valid concern. But I will say that your vote matters in some instances.
Hi, folks. I just want to come back and just say this is an amazing conversation. We're learning so much, and such great comments coming in here too. Treasure, we want to give you a chance to finish up the thought that I know you were having some bandwidth issues with you. Go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, I apologize, everyone. There's like a storm in New York City right now that's messing with my Wi-Fi, but hopefully we won't have complications. Yeah, I would like to finish, because I think this is really important.
I'm going to ask Treasure, if she doesn't mind, just in the side comments, if she just wants to write up something, we will read that out from her, and maybe she'll try to come back. And if we see her moving, I can see that she's frozen, and we're sorry that's happened. We just have a few minutes left. I want to get some of the questions that people have been asking. We have a question from Nick. Julio and Marie, you're both in New York, a state where some people say their vote doesn't matter. What do you say for your peers who believe their vote doesn't matter? What do you say to them? We've talked kind of in the abstract about that, but what if you have a chance to appeal to everyone who's watching now and says, what's the point in voting in New York?
So like I was saying, like your local elections matter a great deal. So like voting for your local judges and voting for your representatives, those things really affect your daily life. So I would say, even if you don't think your vote matters in the grand scheme of things within the Electoral College, on the ballot are more issues that will affect you. Different referendums, different bills that may be going up for your like local platform. So I will say, like in states where they're not considered swing states, it doesn't seem to matter in terms of the national election, but there are a lot more issues on the ballots that will affect you. So
sure. Here's another question, Julia, maybe you can answer this. What about people who choose not to vote because they're not interested in politics? How can we encourage them to vote and establish the fact that their vote matters?
It's if you're not interested in politics, you need to understand that these politicians have an interest and a stake in you, and your inactivity can either hurt or help a lot of things in your community. On this, let's bring this down to a micro level. If you are someone with siblings and you go to school in one district, and suddenly you move in the middle of the semester, and now your sibling can't continue in said district, and they were doing great and everything. If you vote on the local level, you might be able to vote towards referendum about the busing system, and now your sibling, your child, can get an education in the community they've grown to know and love, and that's where your family's established. That's something very personal that you can affect with your vote. Politics is something that it crosses over. It's an intersection we all live with. Everything we do is political, whether we know it or not. So it's one thing to not be interested in politics, and it's another to not engage in it. But by living day in, day out and making the decisions you do, you're actively participating in it. So just go the extra few feet. I'm not even going to say the extra mile. Just go the extra few feet and vote, because a lot of what you do is political to begin with. Why not have a say on what happens on a smaller scale if you don't think it happens or matters at all on the national scale?
Thank you. Marie, do you see this question from Mark? How important do you feel the youth bloc will be, and do you feel any of the national candidates are appealing to you?
Just addressing the national candidates, not really. My vote this election will be based on like the immediate material conditions of other people who will be affected by my vote. So like Julio was saying, even if I'm not personally invested in that, I do know that there are people who will be affected by either outcome. So I'll just do my part. But in terms of how important the youth bloc will be, I will say that this year, as numbers have been showing, young voters have been turning out and have been mailing in their ballots, have been showing up early in larger numbers than previous years. Regardless of our small voting bloc, which I think is like 7% in the like national electorate, I think this year we can really see our demographic making a dent in the outcome of this election. So.
Okay, and Mark also asks, local candidates are very important. How relevant are PACs in your life? Have many of your peers been involved in this? Do you hear much about PACs and about younger voters being involved? Marie, do you have a thought on this?
So in terms of PACs in my life, no, I wouldn't say they're very relevant, but I do understand that like the funding and the ways that elections have been funded have been oftentimes corrupt, and in terms of just like the connections between big PACs, large PACs, like funding and having a stake into our elections more than the people do. I do think that that's an important issue to bring up and an important issue to discuss. But I will say that I think in terms of grassroots organizations helping to fund local elections and young people having to kind of invest financially into how these elections are turning out is going to allow us to have a larger stake in that. So I do think if we do want to see change, we do have to put in $1 and divest from these large institutions and conglomerates funding elections and having more of a stake than we do.
Thank you. Some nice comments here. A great discussion, heavy thinking energy. And Samantha says it's a great discussion. It's very important. Thank you for your comments, everybody. I'm going to ask everyone to give us a final thought, and then we, including our student co-hosts as well. Let's start with Julio. And we should just want to make it clear, Julio, that that's how you pronounce your name. In case people think we've been mispronouncing it all day, I'll give you a chance to explain the origin of your name and give us a final thought too, please.
Yes, precisely. My name is Julio, not Julio. My father's name is Julius, so he gave me the truncated version of his name because he wanted to keep the whole thing. And
so what happens when people call you Julio? Do you correct them once?
I correct them the first time, usually the second time. By the third time, I'm not answering to it. At that point, my name is such an intimate part of who I am, and that's the lowest level, the bare minimum show of respect you can give me. So if you can't get my name right, you don't respect me enough, and I can't then entertain it. Say my name right or don't say it at all.
Good for you. All right, let's get a final thought. Thank you.
My final thought is, as we are now less than a week away from the election, we have seen what the last 3.5 years have been like. We have seen what they have looked like. We know the statistics, whether or not we agree with them. And we have seen the country become a laughing stock, the butt of many, many, many jokes from nations that the current POTUS has spoken down on, like talked down to. So whether or not you like either candidate is almost irrelevant. We need to stop playing into personality contests when we consider politics. You need to think of what the candidate can do for you, your family, and others on a more communal level. America is a very individualistic country. And I think as soon as we start to divest from that, the better, because then collective interests can now start to form and we can build community, true community. And that's what patriotism should look like. And we need to participate. If you are able to participate, please do. If you are unable to, that is fully understood. Get the word out. If you feel your vote doesn't matter, I don't know what to tell you this close to the election, but there are people whose lives are quite literally at stake. Their livelihoods are at stake. So if you don't care too much for national politics, at least engage on a local level, because those are even positions you as a mere citizen can run for and potentially win. So if you want to properly invest in your community and have your community invest in you, you should show a vested interest in politics.
Thank you very much. Julio, where can people find more of you and your podcast and everything else?
You could find me on Instagram at Julio_Taku. I recently launched a podcast called Across the Mic with Julio Taku. The first season is dedicated to Black women, as this year has been particularly difficult for Black women, and I want to honor, respect, and exalt them in any way, shape, or form I can. So if you are a Black woman, you own a business, a product, or you're an entrepreneur, please reach out to me. I will be featuring you either as a guest or be promoting said business on my podcast. And I'm also one of the I am the culture editor at the Stony Brook Press, one of two. So if you want to engage with my work over there, feel free to. I've also written for Shades of Long Island. It's an online media outlet run by Maya Jones, in which the voices of the youth and people of color on Long Island are highlighted, celebrated, and presented on the world stage. So that's where you can find me.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And Julio, we appreciate you and your comments. And just looking at some of the great comments here, including Mikhail says, so many bright minds all in one place. Great job to all involved. Let's go to Marie. Your final thoughts, please.
Yeah, I just want to echo Julio's statements on the importance of community and building coalitions. Even if you don't decide to vote in this election, I think it's important to nurture your communities and organize in whichever ways you can. So mutual aid and crowdfunding and just various ways that you can get politically involved and affecting things on a local level to then magnify things on a national level. I think a lot of the times, like Julio said, this country has been very individualistic. And I think it's time to kind of put the collective on a forefront. So yeah, that's my take on this political landscape. So yeah, just hold your neighbor in mind when you do decide to make any political decision.
Thank you. And Marie, where can people find you?
People can find me at Senegalese on Instagram, that is SENIGGALESE. And my page, The Blueprint Archives, that's Blueprint without an E, on Instagram, is to kind of highlight the stories and the beauty and the humanity of Black people outside of trauma. So.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And Marie, congrats on your great work, and thank you for joining us. Let's go to Treasure. And Treasure, we're asking for your final thoughts. I see you've switched to your phone.
Yes. My final thoughts. I encourage people to go out and vote. I encourage people to familiarize themselves with what a ballot looks like before they go and vote, because it can be a little bit confusing. And I would also really, really, really encourage, especially young people, but everyone, to start looking into international solidarity. I know it's very easy to get into this sort of Western-centric view of politics. But as we've seen in recent months, the entire world is in a very volatile moment politically, socially. And so I really hope that we can familiarize ourselves with the ways that governments work in other places, start building community infrastructure in our communities and abroad if possible. And just to sort of broaden our viewfinder right now, because we're seeing that these systems of oppression we experience in the States are interlocking across the globe. And if one comes down, which I do believe they will soon, then hopefully they all do. So just keeping our politics as broad and expansive as possible to encompass as many people as possible is what I'd say.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And where can people find you, Treasure?
You can find me on Twitter at Treasure F. Brooks, as well as Instagram at Treasure F. Brooks.
Terrific. Thank you so much. And thank you for being with us. We're going to go to our students and ask them about their thoughts and what they learned tonight as well. Let's go to Gabriella.
Hi. So firstly, I want to just thank you guys for just initiating such a really important conversation. And you guys had very different, just different talking points that were really strong. And I really just appreciate all of your insight. And I think it'll definitely inspire just, other young voters, hopefully other people amongst Gen Z to go out and just do, their civic duty. In regards to everything that we've discussed, I definitely agree. In regards to people who say that their vote doesn't matter, I think that's a very sort of privileged statement to say, to think that your vote doesn't matter, to think that your vote doesn't contribute to anything, and to think that you can sort of just skip out on something to that extent, because these are the lives of millions of people, and every political decision affects the other in one way or another. And I feel like that's something to take into account, and especially for minorities and Black and brown communities, it's important to really acknowledge the fact that often we're definitely at a significant disadvantage when it comes to policies and laws instituted by primarily old and white lawmakers who generally do not understand or have a similar experience to what minority communities face. And I think that kind of settling into the idea that, oh, my vote doesn't matter, it just reinforces just certain stigmas and ideas that, no change is going to come from anything. And I feel like, change and wanting to foster certain initiatives that has to come from just taking yourself out of that mindset. So yeah, and something similar to what Marie had mentioned before about, just putting in $1 and divesting into the community. I think that's incredibly important in the entire aspect of, so, create change on a national scale, on a larger scale. We really have to start locally and amongst our own community, because that's where we see just change and just things mobilizing first before we see it on a larger scale. So, yeah.
Thank you, Gabby. Let's go to Tania.
I really enjoyed having this discussion. I would like to thank everyone for being here. I truly believe our generation is a generation of change. In order to implement change, we must use our voices and cast our votes this upcoming election. I really hope this conversation pushes viewers at home to take initiative and cast their votes this election season and educate not only themselves, but everyone else around them. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Tania, and such great comments coming in, including from Blaze. Great discussion, guys. Very refreshing to see great young minds articulate their points brilliantly. And Julio, I think you know this person right here. Great insights. Keep it up, guys. And this is the Julius who is responsible for the name Julio and so much more. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. This was a great discussion. I learned a lot. I know everybody else did as well. Truly appreciate all of you giving us your time. Folks, there are 4 days now left till the election. Please make sure you vote. As we heard, it doesn't matter if you think where you are, your vote doesn't matter for the national election, but it does. But more importantly, it also matters for all the down ballot ticket offices. They all matter, no matter what level. So please go ahead and vote and support this democracy. It's all we've got. So please do that if you can. And if you can't vote because you're not, you're not qualified to vote, you all know people who should be voting who may be a little apathetic. Often I find our international students and others are the most revved up because they understand what's at stake here, or they come from places where they don't have the kind of freedoms we have here. So everyone, please make us encourage everybody you know to vote. And Jonathan, who's watched 233 episodes in a row, says, informative show. Thank you. And I appreciate all of you. Thank you very much, everyone.